All right, let's go ahead and find your seats and we'll get going on this next section. Early this morning, we talked about the culture of integration in the school and the importance of building a bridge with the community. And many times we we'll come into that Canada and we'll have a sense of the history behind it. I want to introduce David Basketry Jr. He's an artist. He's a carver, he's a council member, he's an advocate from that academy. And he also taught in the school many years ago, and I'll let him go through that history a little bit. He's going to have a presentation for us in about an hour, and then we're going to break up into groups, and we have teams and activities, so you guys can go through it at a time. So, with that, Mr. David Basketry.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Real quick before I get started, could I have staff from our community members please raise their hand? Okay. Staff who are. Oh, good afternoon. And staff who are ready to. Okay, I want to understand who I'm talking to. Okay. Gimana Fatihway, Lafu Ero, Boy, you Waku, and you tell. Exactly. My name is Donald Hutt. From Wolfland, here. I'm a carver, mostly artist, and learning art. I don't tend to talk about myself when I do these presentations, but I'll give you just a really quick bio. I was raised here from birth to right now, 2 weeks after I was born. Because my mom didn't want to walk from the birthing room to her recovery room, which I guess the people do back then to get you. And so we flew to Seattle and went over here. My dad was a teacher here. He coached Chiefs in the 70s and was a teacher up until 1986. He decided to become part of full-time and moved to Seattle. Where the galleries are, he became a very successful artist. I grew up wanting to draw comic books, and I ended up going to college to be an illustrator. Left school, became a carver full-time. I learned from my dad, also from Robert Davidson, who's a very well-known Haida carver. All throughout my life, I've dabbled in our language, growing up hearing it from my great-grandfather, singing the songs my dad wrote. And in 2015, decided to move home to Metlakatla to try to become fluent in Somalia. Not quite there yet, but I'm getting close. I have been involved in our culture all my life. And our language and who we are as Simpson people is so important to me, and I feel really fortunate to be able to share as my dad would put it, the Reader's Digest version of our history. I hope you all can see the screen. So this is the Northwest Coast. The Northwest Coast shares some very important things that ended up creating a common civilization up and down the coast based on the salmon and the cedar. Without those, Northwest Coast culture would not be what it is. Our lives revolved around the life cycle of the salmon, and red cedar was everything to us. It built our homes, transportation, clothing, And so while there are many different tribes up and down the coast between Yakutat Bay and the Columbia River in Washington State, and many different languages, there is a shared culture. It was vast trade networks. Our people used to trade all the way up to the Aleutian Islands and all the way down to Mexico. Simpson people originated at a place, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but right up here, the headwaters of the Skeena River called Temlachan. And in our oral history, after the flood, which as an amateur historian may or may not have been the Ice Age, our people dispersed from there a little bit north here and around the upper Skeena to become the Giksan. Down the Nass River became the Niska, and our people went down the Skeena and became the Tsimshian. David. Yeah, this is ancient Simpson history. And the Giksan, Niska, and Simpson all speak three distinct dialects of the same root language. So as we moved down the river and became known as Tsimshian archaically, it was Tsimshian people from inside the Skeena River. That's what Tsimshian means. Tsim means in, Xian is the river. As we moved down, villages were established that would become, best way to put it would probably be city-states. Each of these villages or tribes would own a territory and would have a name that identified them as the people of that place. For example, the first one there, Gitwilgyots, means people of the kelp patch, or Ginachangig is people of the mosquito, and it had to do with their oral history of how they became the people of that place. Over time, there were 14 different Simpson tribes. At one point there were 16, 2 became extinct. 9 of them wintered at a place called Machlachachla, which is a channel near modern-day Prince Rupert. 2 were up the Skeena, and 3 along the coast south of the mouth of the Skeena River. Simpson people are set up into what anthropologists call phratries, we call clans. It's 4 separate divisions, each represented by a primary crest and a whole mess of subcrests underneath each one. And they arrived in our oral history in this order: the Gispudwada, which people will call the Killer Whale clan, Qanhada, Raven clan, Laxgeek, Eagle clan, and Laxgibu, Wolf clan. One of the things, as I've gotten into the language, and I'd like to impress upon the school district something to think about, is to get away from using English when talking about these clans. Gispudwada does not translate to Killer Whale clan. Doesn't mean that. Matter of fact, it's so old we're not 100% confident what it means. Same with Qanhada, they're very old words. Laxgeek and Laxgibu, those clans came later. Those do mean of the eagle and of the wolf. But calling them by their actual name is more accurate to who we are as a people. As I said, below that, each clan has a series of crests, similar to what you think of coat of arms in Europe. For the Gispudwada, their main crest is Neach, the killer whale. For the Qanhada, Qaq, the raven. For the Laxgeek, eagle. And for the Laxgibu, Gibao, the wolf. Since I'm Laxgibu, I'll explain a little bit. You can see with Laxgeek, the words right in there. The wolf clan originates from the Taltan people, came down through the Niska first. They say Gibu for wolf. So that stuck, even though in our Somalia we say Gibao for wolf. I don't know why that never switched, but it didn't. This is a map of Simpson territory. Again, up here is what's called the canyon. It's where the Gitzilasha and Gitsimkalim people came from. The main Simpson winter villages were down on the coast, except for those two tribes up the river. We would winter in permanent villages and then move to summer fish camps to fish and put up food for the summers. Simpson villages always face the water. This is a commonality, especially for the northern tribes. The main reason was so you could see who was coming. You would do your best to set your village up so there was mountain and rocky terrain behind you so that people couldn't raid from behind. This is also why totem poles stand in the front of houses facing the water, so when you pulled up as a guest, you'd know whose house you were going to from the images on their poles and house fronts. This is a very famous house front that's currently on display in Washington, D.C. It's a Nuganuk's house front from Loch Williams, Port Simpson. Formline, which this school does, I think, probably the best of any school on the Northwest Coast, educating our students about two-dimensional art. Formline is a term coined by a man we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's a two-dimensional design system, comes with a lot of rules and structure, and you most often see our crests displayed in this two-dimensional art style. Our people wore tattoos. Even though this is a photo of a Haida fellow, our people wore their crests tattooed on their bodies and with face paint. A lot of explorers' journals and such talk about seeing people with their faces completely painted. This is, again, it's hard to find all the images you need for a presentation like this. This is actually an interior of a Haida longhouse, but just to show you the size that these tiered homes could be, they would be dug down into the earth. A lot of village sites now that you go see, all you can see left in the ground are the depressions of where the houses used to be. These would be multi-family, multi-generational homes. Our people lived communally, based on that matrilineal line. There would be the chief of the house and his matrilineal family around him. So again, we are matrilineal. I don't think I said that before, but everything comes from our mothers. All descent rights and privileges come from our mother's sides. So the chief of the house, even though he's often a man, there were women chiefs, but it's talked about in our Dao, that our oral history, that when a woman would assume a chief's position, she would be addressed as a man. This comes, I think, for the sense of balance. If your entire identity comes from the mother's side, the figurehead can be a man. You guys ever see My Big Fat Greek Wedding? You know that line where she says, yes, the man is the head of the household, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn the head whichever way she wants. That's very similar to Simpson and Northwest Coast culture. Our oral histories would be known not only among our own families, our neighbors and the homes in our villages would know each other's histories, and the other tribes, because there was so much intermarriage, we would know each other's stories. One, because everything was done publicly at Potlatch, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also so there could be checks and balances. If someone wanted to go claim something that wasn't theirs, everyone wouldn't be like, you know you can't do that kind of thing. In the summertime, we would, as I said, go to fish camp. This is a huge fish camp up on the Nass River, which is where we go to get uligan, sometimes called candlefish. Our word is rah, or halamoat, which means savior. It was the first fresh fish of the year that would arrive, and we would both smoke and dry it, but also render it to create uligan grease, which is a acquired taste for most. For me, I could put a tablespoon of it right on in and enjoy it. It's created by letting the fish ferment in vats for a couple weeks, then it's boiled, and the fat rises to the top and that's skimmed off and it's used as a condiment. And it's medicinal, it's very good for you. We did all kinds of fishing techniques, traps of all different sorts, spearing and harpooning fish. Fishing is still incredibly important to our people. Your school is lucky to have Miss Leask, who is incredibly knowledgeable about all of this, and I will not talk about things that I'm not so knowledgeable in. Potlatch. Potlatch is becoming again, and was, the legal system on the Northwest Coast. It was our banking system. It was, for lack of a better way to put it, our notary public. If anything needed to be done to document life moments, it had to be done publicly at a feast. You would invite guests, feed them very well, usually in the old days put them up also, and pay them with gifts. And by accepting your food and accepting that the gifts, they put their stamp of approval on the event, that everything the host claimed was done right and it's approved, and then again they can go off and assure other folks that yeah, it was there, it was done correctly. Potlatch was also the time for ceremony, things called secret societies, which for our people anyway, after the coming of the missionary and colonization was stopped. But this was also the place where, I think this slide is a little out of order. We also had gambling stick games that we would play long into the night, whether we were out fishing or in the wintertime. This was another thing that was stopped pretty quick. Musical instruments, this is a box drum. This is made with the same technique as you make Bentwood box with. These are our traditional drums. Skin drums, hide drums, those tambourine style drums weren't introduced to us until much later. This style drum. We also had clappers. This is made from two pieces of wood that get real thin at one end, and you clap and it makes a clapping sound. Because food was so plentiful on the Northwest Coast, we had the time in the winter, and even artists who were the masters would have time throughout the year to create art that was used in our ceremony. And the level of beauty of Northwest Coast art lays bare just how secure we were. You don't create the amount of artwork that was created on the Northwest Coast if you're worried about what you're going to eat tomorrow. This crest hat, it's a frog with a human face underneath, comes from our people. It was collected in Metlakatla, British Columbia. Again, display of crests was very important. Again, just like coat of arms. Everything a clan wore during ceremony or was displayed on their objects at home would show their crests. This one's a little out of order too. Button blankets came later, after contact. We traded for blankets and buttons, and we've never had these kinds of blankets or buttons before, so we used them to decorate the blankets and put our crests on them. Totem poles are unique to the Northwest Coast. My dad always talks about when he was a little boy and playing with this toy set called Fort Apache, and it had cowboys and Indians and a teepee and a totem pole in it. They still make and sell those toy sets. Where they'd have the Field of Dreams baseball field? You can buy those in their gift shop for some reason. But totem poles are unique to the Northwest Coast. There's a great Adao, or oral history, about how there was a Simpson canoe going across to Haida Gwaii. And when they were getting near land, this boy looked out over the edge of his canoe and he could see a house underneath the water. And there were 4 carved house posts. with figures on, looked like totem poles. Totem poles started as house posts, the big posts that held up the roof beams. And when they got to Haida Gwaii, they talked to the Haida about what they'd seen, and the Haida knew about it. We know now through scientific research that there are submerged villages in Queen Charlotte Straits. During the Ice Age, the waters were so low that there were villages all along what used to be much more like a river going between the mainland and Haida Gwaii. And when the ice melted, waters came up, covered those old houses. So totem poles predate the melting of the Ice Age, and were rediscovered by looking down under the water before it was too deep to see them and before they deteriorated. And Simpsons took that idea and moved them to both as house posts but also exterior freestanding totem poles. This is a copper shield. You'll see this a lot, both in people's jewelry. You got 4 of them, facsimiles hanging up in the commons there. This is called a copper shield. That is sadly a poor English word to use, as they aren't shields in like a weapon or a piece of defense. They're not armor. It's a shield like a policeman's badge is a shield. They represent wealth. They were brought out at potlatches. Many of them had names. Depending on how many times they were brought out and the name was recited and the story was told and gifts were distributed, they would raise in value, as would the names of the people hosting the feast. Names have incredible value to our people. There are some copper shields that are said to be worth, a few canoes and hundreds of blankets. As I said, everything that we had was, at least for ceremony, highly adorned. This is a chief's frontlet. It will be worn here on the forehead. This obviously belonged to somebody who was Ganhada, because those frogs are the crest of the Ganhada. Simpson people, it is said, created the 3 objects that we think of as chief's regalia. So this is Amhalite, this is Simhalite, again a raven rattle, and Gwishalite, which is nowadays called the Chilcad Blanket, but it originated with our people. It is woven with mountain goat wool on a loom. You can see the design is done here on a board first and then translated to the weaving. I believe it is the only, I never remember how to phrase this, it's the only hand-woven weaving style in the world that can weave a perfect circle. Before that were these geometrically woven blankets that we call raven's tail now. Those fell out of use with the onset of Gwishalite, Chilcad weaving. You can see this one, though, maintains some of that geometric style weaving up above the design, kind of a hybrid robe. They're called Chilcad blankets because after contact, the tribe that was doing the most, creating them the most on the coast were the Chilcad Blankets. But even they have acknowledged that this weaving style is of Simpson origin. Masks are incredibly important in Simpson potlatch. They were used both to explain the origin of crests. So if there's a story that went along with how someone got a crest, the story would be acted out with masks showing supernatural beings and the events that brought us to how these things occurred. This is a stone mask, actually. This is in the Louvre in Paris. The other one is in Canada. There's a set. One has the eyes open, set of eyes are closed. This also, the eyes open and close, the mouth opens and closes. We were incredibly theatrical when it came to these winter ceremonies. This is another mask that was collected in Metlakatla, British Columbia, that belonged to our people. It was both that and the frog helmet from earlier were part of a collection that sadly got auctioned off a few years ago. Like any other society on Earth, we also had war. This is a style of armor. It was a hardwood, like the burl of a tree would be used to create the helmet. A steamed visor. The wood would be steamed around to fit the face, so you couldn't see the warrior's face. And then all of our weapons were small, short, close contact type weapons. Weaving was an incredibly important part of Northwest Coast culture and society. Basketry not only was beautiful, but it was functional and used in everyday life, from gathering berries, picking clams, just everything. There were some that were woven absolutely watertight. Other containers were carved bowls that we would. This one is so shiny like that because it had Ooligan grease served in it, and the grease soaks right up into the wood. So you can go to museums now all over the world and find these bowls that you could still run your thumb on it, and there's still grease seeping out of these bowls. And again, would be carved with very intricately, sometimes with the crests of the owners. Bentwood boxes were really important storage items and furniture for our people. This is a technology unique to the Northwest Coast, where one cedar board is steamed and bent on 3 corners, joined on the 4th with a bottom and a lid added. These are also could be watertight, and you could boil fish in them. You put hot rocks in, change them out with tongs until the water boils, and you could cook fish inside of these Bentwood boxes. Our shamans, which again is an English word that I don't know that I care for, we called them Swanskum Halite or Halite. The Halite is a power that both chiefs and shamans possessed, and was supernatural power. But much of their healing was based on traditional plants, medicines found in our world, along with ceremony. There's a great saying by shamans. You know, they'd show up and someone would be really sick, so the shaman would say, "Well, you called me too late, but I'll see what I can do." You know, it covers them. If he saves them, oh, it's amazing. You know, even though they're too late. If he doesn't, well, I told you I was too late. This is called a soul catcher. This was unique to Simpson people. Amulets like this were worn by shamans. It held their healing powers and things like that. Shamans also tended to use what are called globe rattles. Some were fancier than others. Okay, contact for Simpson people with Europeans happened in 1787 near Kitkatla, British Columbia. Kitkatla is one of the first village, that painting I showed at the beginning. Kitkatla is one of the oldest continually inhabited human settlements on Earth. There were people there before the Tsimshian migrated down the Skeena River. They intermarried. They call themselves Tsimshian now, but Kitkatla is old enough that there were another people there. That's how old that village is. So 1787, change came fast. This is a painting of an interaction of trade between Chief Legaic, who is standing up in his canoe here pointing to his rock painting. This painting can still be seen just outside of Prince Rupert on a wall. There's now a railroad track going across there, but you can get out and actually still see it. And it was, he had, now when I say he, names are passed on. So if someone has a name for a period of time, this is a way that our people have achieved a certain form of immortality. That name is then passed on to someone else in that matrilineal lineage. So when I talk about Legaic, there's maybe 6 or 7 at least Legaics. You know, but that name carries on. So when I say he did this, it could be several of them over time. But he had done very well in trade with Europeans, and had become so powerful that he laid claim to the entire Skeena River. Even tried to go up and take over the Gixan at one point. There are some Simpson who still think quite highly of that name in history. There are others who got the other end of his, like the Gixan, who maybe weren't as thrilled about him. But he became very powerful, so powerful that he could call on the other tribes to come fight with him, potlatch with him. He was very powerful. He married his daughter to the commander of the Hudson Bay Company fort that was established at the mouth of the Nass River. He didn't like that his daughter was up there by the cold of the mouth of the Nass, and convinced his son-in-law to move the fort south a bit into his territory, into Simpson territory. Down to a place that we call, now Loch Alams is a shortened version of what this word actually is. It's Loch Skuk Alams, it means place of wild roses. And this channel here is Machlachatla, and this is where 9 Simpson tribes wintered every year. So there's lots of potlatch and everything that went along through Metlakatla Pass. So they established Fort Simpson up here at Loch Skuk Alams, and in order to control trade in his territory, Legaic moved his tribe, his winter village, to the fort. Not to be outdone, the other 8 tribes who also wintered at Machlachatla moved with him. So soon you had 2,300 Simpson living outside of this fort that had a few dozen people working at it. All of a sudden, for the first time in Simpson history, you have all of these different houses. So remember, every house has a chief. And the volleying for power that came out of this was brand new to our people, to have everybody all in one place like that. And again, it wasn't everybody. There were other Simpson communities, but the 9 that wintered at Loch Alams. You introduce into that alcohol, guns, poor trade policies by the Hudson Bay Company, and things began to deteriorate for us. This is a painting by a Simpson named Freddie Alexie. Freddie Alexie from Port Simpson. And so there was potlatching, totem poles going up, but again, all surrounded by the influence of the fort. A ship captain came through, his name was Prevost, and he saw the conditions of the fort, judged us on what he saw that day rather than bothering to take any time to learn about Simpson history, and wrote to the Church Missionary Society of England, said, you got to send somebody to civilize and Christianize these poor Indians. In their infinite wisdom, they sent a 24-year-old man who hadn't finished his schooling. He was never ordained. His name was William Duncan. He was born in Beverly, England, to unwed parents. And at that time, in England, being born a bastard was a lifelong mark down for you. You were always less than. And he worked really hard to prove that he was as good as everybody else, to the point that he was an overachiever. He came to Port Simpson in 1857 and lived inside the fort for what varying accounts say between 6 months to a year, learning our language. He made some incredibly smart choices based on why he came to us. And the best one was to learn our language first. He didn't want an interpreter misinterpreting him to us. And he got this man whose name at the time was Tumks, would later be baptized as Arthur Wellington. So this is the origin of the Wellington family here in Metlakatla. And he taught Mr. Duncan our language. Duncan then gave a speech to the head of each of the 9 tribes, the highest ranking chief of each of the 9 tribes, and explained why he was there. Over the next 5 years, he built a church/schoolhouse, started doing school and church services. At one point, Legaic had asked him not to ring the school bell during a potlatch that he was having for his daughter's coming of age potlatch, and Duncan rang the bell anyway, and Legaic charged up there with a knife and was going to kill Mr. Duncan, and Arthur Wellington pulled out a pistol. Didn't shoot him, but scared him off. And if you could go take a time machine and stop that moment from happening and let Legaic do what he's going to do, this place would disappear. We never would have been here. Duncan decided that he could not do what he was sent there to do if we remained around the influences of the potlatching being done at the fort. He wanted to get us away from what at the time was called Indian deviltry. So he and his followers, which was quite a large amount at this point, decided to move down to a place that had on Machlachachla Pass that was originally called Spoon Mchaltzap. It was a old village site, and chose that as a new home and called it, taking the name of the channel, called it Metlakatla. They built the largest church north of San Francisco and west of Chicago. Some people called it Duncan's Westminster Abbey. I believe it held way over 1,000 people. We built a cannery, blacksmith shop, soap shop, trading post. We had gas street lights, built kind of hybrid European but also longhouse style homes. Initially, people still lived in combined family homes. At the time, missionaries were taught to teach their converts to farm. You don't really farm on the Northwest Coast. So we were allowed to continue getting our traditional foods, thank goodness. That knowledge has survived right from the old days because of that decision. So all those canoes, I wish we'd kept all those canoes. But we would still go out gathering in the summertime. To go to Metlakatla, though, you had to sign a piece of paper, a document that declared you would live by the rules of the community. And the first 5 are to give up their halait, that's the winter ceremonies or Indian devilry, to cease calling in shamans when sick, to cease gambling, to cease giving away their property for display, meaning potlatch, and to cease painting their faces. So those were the things you agreed to in order to live at Metlakatla. Along with that came the chiefs had to forfeit their positions. Everyone had to be equal. Duncan was clever again, though. He put people like that in positions of power, made them councilmen, captain of the fire brigade, and things like that, as to not completely strip them and humiliate them after having had such high positions. And Metlakatla became very famous as an example of look what, from a European perspective, look what can be done with the Indians. The Church of England did not like how Mr. Duncan was running the mission. He had altered the way Anglican church services went. He didn't serve wine at communion as to have us abstain from alcohol, and had kind of turned Anglican worship into a much more Protestant style church service. Eventually Duncan broke away from the Church of England completely. They were independent. It was called the Metlakatla Christian Church, and they were just an independent church. So the Church of England that had put so much into the mission sent this man, created a new position for him. His name was Bishop Ridley. They called him the Bishop of New Caledonia, to go and take over the mission. Went in, boarded up mission buildings, There were a minority of our people who, just like anywhere, no one likes a leader all the time. There were certain folks that didn't, at that point, decided to side with the bishop rather than Mr. Duncan, and created a very strong conflict within Metlakatla. People were carrying guns, sides, lines were drawn, kind of thing. And rather than fight, Duncan had tried to fight he's one of the first people to fight for Indigenous land rights. It was our land, but the Indian Act of 1884 said that we were not human, therefore couldn't own land. And rather than fight, the British government and the church decided, well, let's move. So he sent a party north to go find a good place for a new community, and he went to Washington, D.C. to ask President Cleveland and Congress if we could move to the Alaska Territory. The story goes that they had gone north, as far north as the Stikine River, and on the way back down, met with Chief Johnson in Ketchikan, who said Takwan, which is our pronunciation of the Tlingit word for this place, had been abandoned. There used to be a Tlingit village here that was abandoned about 50 years before we got here. And another tribe of Tlingit had attacked, and the people who had been here went to Ketchikan. And the myth of this, no one can know for sure, but he said, oh, that'd be a good place. And whether or not he gave permission or it was a suggestion, I'm not sure. But we got here, and we liked the sandy beaches for our canoes and the fresh water coming down from the waterfall. It was a great place for a village. Obviously, the Tlingits knew what they were doing. Interesting story about that, though. I've recently come across oral history that talks about that there was a tribe, the Gitsis tribe of Simpson people. There was a Raven clan that had moved north to Bean Canal, North Ketchikan. And over time and intermarriage had become Tlingit people, and that is the origin of the Ganachadi clan that had this village here. I'd known that there was a trade relationship between the Gitsis and the people here. Come to find out that it's because they were relations. So we knew of this place way prior to 1887, and it was not some shock to come here. And again, Takwan is our pronunciation of Tak-Ani, which means winter village in Tlingit. That's right. John Reese said that Chief Johnson was actually half Simpson. So one of the things, before I move on to the rest of this, is if you look at a map of the Northwest Coast and you see where tribes are, the hard lines that we tend to draw on maps don't really work for the way our cultures work. There was a lot of intermarriage, flux, and movement. There are old Simpson place names, Somali place names, all over southern Southeast Alaska. The idea that we only showed up in 1887 is a bunch of hooey. And which is why when I give this presentation, I don't start with the coming of Mr. Duncan. Simpson history is, more than 10,000 years, and we just happen to, because of colonization, have lost a good chunk of what came before. We have more information about this to share, but there are a ton of Adao that were saved, our oral history that were saved. So yeah, coming to Takwan, I don't think was some mystery. You all know Takwan Air was started here. That name, again, is what the old people called this place. And try when you pronounce it to say Takwan. AA in Somalia is Takwan. I hear people like Takwan Air. Oh, drives me nuts. Takwan, okay? If you're speaking Somalia, if you're speaking Tlingit, the awe is gone. So when we got here, we sent about 50 guys ahead to build temporary shelters along the beach. There was one Tlingit pole still standing, that got sent up to Sheldon Jackson in Sitka, and it's still on display at the Sheldon Jackson Museum. And after Congress, the President gave its approval, 823 of our people over the month of August moved to Metlakatla. This is a photo of the canoes being towed. And Mr. Duncan arrived on August 7th, 1887, which is why we celebrate that as Founders Day. It was the day the American flag was raised down on the beach at Sewan-Hoo. Sewan-Hoo is what we call the ball field, or Russell Hayward Memorial Park. It's called Sewan-Hoo. You don't see it much anymore, but prior to all the rocks getting put down in around the corner, there's a big sandbar that sticks out on the corner. Hoo is a sandbar, and Sewan is a point. So it's talking about, sometimes it's called Village Point. We spent 2 winters on the beach. I think Mr. Duncan wanted to know we were committed to this effort. It was hard. There were a few people that left and went back. Some folks went to Ketchikan. There's actually an enormous Simpson population in Ketchikan. If it's to be believed, I was told that in a census a few years ago, there were actually more Simpson over there than Tlingits and Haidas, but I don't know how much folks in Ketchikan would love to hear that. This is one of my favorite photos in the world. This is a picture of 40, 50 men on ropes pulling the stumps out of the ground by hand to clear the lot for the community. And if you can imagine the size of, I don't know how many of you heard the term walk the block in Metlakatla, but when you talk about the block, from the church, Duncan Church, down to his house, down to the market, and down to the bottom of Church Street, that's the original block of town. When you say walk the block, that's what they're talking about. So I imagine clearing that area for homes. You know, the work that our people put into, it wasn't just here. You know, we've done it twice in a 25-year time span. Built a community out of nothing, all to be able to change with the times. You know, again, first contact was 1787. By 1887, we were a member of a near 1,000 member community of Christian converts, having built the largest church north of San Francisco and west of Chicago. You know, the change that occurred was absolutely enormous, and Metlakatlans handled that change about as good as anybody could have. And Mr. Duncan gave us the tools to survive in this modern world. I'll get to more about Mr. Duncan in a minute. The first home that was built, permanent home that was built, was his cottage. We built this bandstand down at the ball field, and this photo was taken, I assume, from that bandstand. He went to England and learned how to play a bunch of instruments and came back and taught us how to play those instruments. He was really, whether you agree with all of his choices or not, I don't, of course, but he was an incredible man, and his talent was truly astounding. So the community grew up, and again, we have our councilmen here. There they are with Mr. Duncan in the back. We joked about bringing the sashes back. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We built a new church. There's even stories that we went over and stole some of the windows and things from the old church in Metlakatla, BC. You know, we thought, well, it's ours. We built it, so that only happened the one time, if I remember right. But it was a huge church, held about 1,000 people, and the pulpit that he preached from, even though the original church here burnt down in 49, a lot of things were saved, and that pulpit was saved. So the pulpit that's in the Duncan Church now is the one William Duncan preached from. Again, taught us to play instruments. Our bands were very famous. At one point, the Duncan Church Choir went down and recorded a couple albums with RCA. You might think Simpson's invented basketball. Thank you for laughing. These are the only 2 basketball things I'm going to talk about in this presentation. You will get enough of basketball in your time here at Net Island School District. Don't get me wrong, I love the game. My dad was coach of the Chiefs. It's a lot. Anyway, played other sports, baseball team. Everything was boardwalks, even up into my father's time. There were still boardwalks around the community. From a cultural perspective, though, there were things that remained. Everybody who moved over here from British Columbia spoke our language. And Mr. Duncan's school was bilingual, and the church was bilingual. Again, he was fluent in our language. So that remained. Knowledge of medicines and all of our food gathering remained. And in the early days, I'm sure, because of the old people who came over, some of the pioneers, people who settled Metlakatla, Alaska, had been chiefs and all of that. But things occurred that made certain parts of that knowledge be severed. And I'll get to that in a minute. One of the things that Mr. Duncan allowed was he let our ladies keep weaving because the baskets could be sold in our trading post. What happened there is fascinating to me, and something I'm particularly proud of as a Metlakatlan, is that we, borrowing from Tlingit and Haida styles, created a new weaving style that is unique to this island. It's the only, what you could think of as indigenous artwork that came from this place and our people. The rest is much older, totem poles and all that. That's all ancient art styles. But our baskets here with this false embroidery on red cedar basketry is unique to Metlakatla. And many of our ladies did this style of weaving. And it's pretty, once you start studying, it's pretty recognizable. You spot them all over. You can still find old ones for sale in Juneau and other places. Carvers carved what we think of now as, I don't mean this in any way disrespectful, but tourist style totem poles. One of the things that happened with the halting of the potlatch was that the old masters, these incredible old artists, there was no reason to pass on that knowledge. If there wasn't going to be potlatch anymore, crests weren't going to be brought out anymore, their teachings stopped. And the carvers who had memory of these things or who just needed to make a living went on carving. So you had folks like Casper Mather, Sidney Campbell, Eli Tate, but you can see that formline is gone. And that was a result of potlatch ban and our culture changing. Edward Marsden, who had been a ward of Mr. Duncan, what time? Oh, see, I'm going to talk faster. Okay, had gone off and become a Presbyterian minister, the first native minister in the country. He, and along with a few others, had been unhappy with the level of education that Mr. Duncan offered and asked the U.S. government to bring in a school because we saw other communities were getting better educations than us. The downside to that was the minute the U.S. government put in a school here, our language was against the rules. And for the first time, children, our own people in our own community were punished for speaking our language. There's a story of a little girl who was raised by her grandmother. A teacher walked by and heard her speaking Somali to her grandmother. They weren't even at school. And the teacher took her up to the school, spanked her, and brought her back to her grandmother. Her grandmother asked probably something like, did they spank you? And she said, oh. And the teacher took her up and spanked her again. Back in the day, there were signs in Ketchikan, no dogs or Indians allowed. So, Mr. Duncan didn't stop our language. One of the things I'd be grateful for, and because he didn't, we were able to do more with our language than we could have had he stopped it even before we moved here. But the U.S. government did a very good job, along with not just here, but kids that were sent to the Wrangell Institute or Sheldon Jackson, of beating our language out of our people. That creates, along with having to leave our homelands of 10,000 years, trauma. And that trauma is with us today. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to try to go faster. Mr. Duncan died in 1918, the same year my great-grandparents got married. And his influence on this place cannot be understated. For as much as it was our people's decision to move here and create this place, we could not have done it without him. And the more you learn about Metlakatla history, the harder and harder it is to hate the man. Because he, in his way, loved us. I truly believe he did. Hindsight is 20/20. You look back, there are things maybe he didn't have to do. But we are forever connected to him. And that's just Apnila Weld. That's the way it is. After his death, there was a big hullabaloo, and I thought, I can't get through this relatively short presentation about Metlakatla history. After his death, there was some upheaval. Some people assumed Edward Marsden should automatically take his place as the preacher at the church. Not everybody agreed with that, and in 1922, the Presbyterian Church was built, and there was a split in the community, Duncan Church folks and Presbyterian folks. Funny story, I found out that my great-grandfather, his entire family, his parents and all his siblings, were founding members of the Presbyterian Church, except for him, because the year Duncan died, he had married my great-grandmother, Dora Hayward, whose family went to the Duncan Church. So, happy wife, happy life. He kept going with his wife to the Duncan Church. So it split families, this thing. And there's a funny story. I was learning to make a bread recipe once, and because my great-grandmother had gone to the Duncan Church, I was going to get given this bread recipe. But the girl I was dating at the time was Presbyterian, and I wasn't allowed to tell her the recipe. So it carried on right up into modern day. The town hall was finished in 1931 by free labor from the community, just like all our old original buildings. Everything was built by our people. It was a very, very old traditional Simpson way of everybody helping each other. This was President Harding coming to visit Metlakatla in 1923, I believe. He was out of office by then. The original church burnt down in 1949, and was built right up again, smaller, finished in December of 1951. We used to have an airport. That's what that runway is out the other end of town. Pan Am and other airlines landed out there, and I'm assuming that all the non-native folks in Ketchikan got sick of having to catch ferries and planes from here to Ketchikan, so they built one of the shortest runways anywhere over in Ketchikan, and now we have to take ferries and planes home. This is a photo of my dad's third grade class, I think. He talks about growing up, going to Cowboys and Indians movies, and afterwards thinking, they wanted to be the Cowboys because the Cowboys win. And he always thought there was something wrong with that. But they grew up without, it's not so simple to say without our culture, because obviously there were parts of it still around. Again, language, food, there were elements of it around, but not that ran our society. Potlatch was not a thing. All of that had been put away. So, it's quite in my mind, this shocking change that happened in a really relatively short amount of time. And the process of bringing that back, which I'm going to tear through right now, because I'm sorry this is it's hard to fit all of this into a short presentation. Our culture came back with the art. In the 50s and 60s, actually in the 30s, there was something called the Civilian Conservation Corps, and that's where a lot of like the Totem Park and Saxman, you see, those were replicas of older poles that were done to get people employed. So almost all of those poles over there that are still standing are copies of older poles. In the 50s and 60s, there was the beginning of the renaissance of Northwest Coast art. Folks like Mungo Martin, who was a Kwakwaka'wakw chief, Bill Holm, who literally wrote the book and created the word form line. So when we talk about ovoids and U-forms and all of that, this Bill Holm is the guy who invented all that terminology. Bill Reed, who worked with Mungo Martin, and then Robert Davidson, who raised the first modern Haida totem pole in 1969 in Masset. Because of the shame that had been put on us for just being who we are, and the difficulty of the transition to this Western way of being, it took the art, which was this tangible thing that we could see and grab onto, as something that we could be proud of. Look what our people are capable of. And for us, that started in the 70s when Jack Hudson moved home and started teaching here at the school. And you might not know it now because John's program is an institution at this point. Jack had to fight to make that program, and he had to fight for it nearly every year of his nearly, 40 years that he taught here. And I'm so grateful to him for that, for making it so important. That, and around the same time in the early 70s, this next picture isn't from the early 70s, but these ladies, folks like Patsy Beale, Sarah Booth, Sissy Guthrie, Barb Fawcett, there were others, started the first dance group in Metlakatla called the Gitlachlik Stad Dancers. And that started out of a Head Start program where the Head Start director had seen dancing somewhere and she thought, gee, our kids should have that. So they brought some Giksan people over and taught us some songs. And that's where the Gitlachlik Stad came from originally. This is them, because they were the only group in town, leading songs during my dad's first potlatch and pole raising here in 1982. That's my white head blending into the wall up there on top. Here, yeah. Again, they were the only dance group here at home, and they sang and performed for that first potlatch. Since then, our culture has in certain ways exploded. In 1994, we had the first 4-day potlatch. It started out as my great-grandfather's memorial, but each clan hosted a day. We fed more than 1,000 people a night for 4 nights. It was enormous. That the distribution of gifts has come back, dancing and us thinking of ourselves as not only as Simpson people, because I think we've always had that, but one of the things that was so important that our ancestors did was, even though there was so much we had to give up, again, chiefs gave up those positions, potlatching wasn't done anymore, but thankfully, families remembered what their clan was, that was so important, that knowledge carried down. And that has been a real foundation, I think, in our steps forward to taking all of this back. This is potlatch prep, people putting gift bags together for the events. I had a family member of mine in Loch Willam's say to me after she saw pictures of our potlatching, she said, gee, it looks like we're the ones that went with Duncan and you guys kept everything. It was a really proud moment to have somebody think that of how far we've come. There's fun also at potlatches, and it's getting sad because this whole row of ladies are all gone. Pride is a crucial thing in a young person's upbringing. I don't mean the haughty, nose in your air kind of pride. I mean a sense of knowing who you are is crucial. And that's where we come to with our language. We're in trouble. When I moved home 7 years ago, there were 6 fluent speakers here. Now there's 1. And I just want to go through and give just a quick acknowledgement of some folks. This is William Bainan, who transcribed a whole bunch of our oral history in Somalia back between the 30s and 50s. And some heroes here in Metlakatla. One of the things that you'll find that if you try to acknowledge people and give thanks, if you forget someone, the fear of missing someone is darn near terrifying. So I want everybody, especially folks here from home, to know that if I have left somebody out of this, it was in no way intentional. These are just some folks I felt like highlighting, and if I'm missing somebody, I didn't mean to. This is Russell Hayward. Arnold Booth, his wife Mary also did a lot of language work with him. Her sister Sarah was my teacher. Donna Mae Roberts, who will be doing some more work with you guys. She's a fluent speaker, but she doesn't live here in Metlakatla at the moment. She lives down south. We've had help from fluent speakers from British Columbia. The language we speak here and what is spoken in Prince Rupert and Kitkatla and other Coast Simpson communities is similar enough that there's not a big difference, and they've helped us a lot. This is Bossy Bolton. This is Sarah's cousin, Velma Nelson. We've had immersions. This is Chief Matthew Hill. This is the late John Reese. Workshops up at UAS that Dr. D'Angeli set up. There are Somalia get-togethers over Zoom at least 4 or 5 days a week. Now, is it 7 days a week now? The effort has grown, and over the last decade, I'm just so proud of the effort that's being put into revitalizing our language. A few years ago, we put together a bilingual weaving guide to teach our style of weaving in our language. Dolores Churchill, who's a Haida weaver, had come over here in the 70s and learned our weaving style from our ladies, and her daughter were able to help us put together the wording. Sarah translated into Somalia. We got to go visit Jack's collection, which is absolutely amazing, that his daughter Annette now has. And the photographs of their collection have helped a lot. John, again, took over for his father. This was from a whistle class that I took from John a few years ago. And like I said, now it's an institution, and I'm really us carvers. There's a real fraternity about being a carver, and John has done a lot of research, and is a, forgive me the way I'm about to put this, a damn good carver. Our kids have been learning their best through these classes. Miss McCarty, now Gamas, Timlanet, Naomi have really been trying hard, and our language is what makes us Tsimshian. I talked about how similar we are to the other tribes on the coast. It's Somalia that makes us us, and preserving that and getting to the point where we can create new fluent speakers is of urgency. I'm happy that, for everybody's information, Kamas, that was my great-grandfather's name. So in the old way, my great-grandfather is teaching down at the elementary school, which is super cool. Orange Shirt Day, talking about the trauma that comes from our language loss, identity loss, land loss. Those are things that are just now coming about, and for as much as it hurts to talk about what happened with residential schools, government schools, that discussion is necessary if we're going to move beyond the trauma that we know now is genetic, that our grandparents and great-grandparents suffered such trauma that's passed down genetically to the next generation. And they've found that heritage language reacquisition and a positive cultural identity can help heal those traumas. And so what I want to get to there for you guys is that transmission. For as much as we as a community are doing our best to do that ourselves, we need you to help us. For some kids, this might be the only place that they get to learn about their culture. So while a lot of you did not become teachers, especially those of you who aren't from here, didn't become teachers to help a bunch of Simpsons in Southeast Alaska relearn our culture, I am terribly grateful to you for helping with that. Metlakatla's history is unique and I think would make a great movie or miniseries, HBO or something. It's fascinating. And I could spend all day talking about this. I'd like, if anybody has any questions for me, I want to put this up this summer. If any of you who aren't from here and don't get to spend the summers should stick around once or twice in your life for the beginning of August. There are often potlatches and Founders Day that happens, and my good friend Clifton and his Guthrie family just put on a potlatch and raised this totem pole for their grandfather Solomon Guthrie. Super duper proud of him. That the way I see it, the folks who helped get our culture to where it is now, the folks that my generation learned from, they did it so that we could go on and do it without them. And this pole was Clifton's idea, and he ran with it. And it's just beautiful. It's just the meaning behind it, and that we're doing this again, considering the length of our history. The hiccup of colonization and the damage to our people in the span of our 10,000 plus year history is just a blip. And I'm really proud every time I see something like this going on, that we are who we are, and that the strength of that was stronger than what happened to us. Thank you all very much. Like I said, I'm available for any questions, or we should probably go to your breakout sessions. But I'm grateful to you all for educating our people, and I'm really, really honored to have been here today. Thanks, Tom, for having me.
Thank you so much, David, for sharing. We had this presentation a couple of years ago before COVID. It really resonated with our staff, and as well as those of us in the community, have been in the community for a long time. We give David one more round of applause. We really appreciate it. I believe now we have some breakout sessions, is that correct? You want to give everyone like a 5-10 minute break? Nathan, why don't you come up here and kind of explain what we're going to do next?
Do you have time to stick around?
Yeah.
Okay. Kibao is going to stay here to answer some questions. After a really quick break, we have 3 different groups. Demlanet, he's going to be taking the van around, and he's going to do like a totem pole tour. I think we can fit 11 in the van, I think. And then Gamash, where's Gamash? Gamash back here, he's going to do a reader's theater. The adaptive Salmon and Prince, how to incorporate reader's theater into the classroom. And then I'm going to have a sweatshop out back. I'm going to share all my Graham Smokehouse secrets. And then I think we only have 30 minutes per group. So the idea is you guys are going to try to rotate through all 3 groups. Hopefully we have time.
Sorry.
So they just decide.
Yeah,
which group?
I've got to grab I've grabbed 2 vans and I've grabbed Tammy.
Okay.
And we're gonna,
If you want to start with the tour, David will be out front over here, and then we can rotate through the other groups. Gamash, where are you going to set up?
Sally's classroom.
Okay, so Gamash will be in Sally's math classroom out in the annex, and Naomi will be in the classroom in the annex. So I guess it's the annex or it's out front of the high school.
So like, I felt right now.